IBM presents You Make the Call.
Welcome to the inaugural episode of You Make the Call. My name is Jeff, and I'll be hosting this episode of the Other Coast series covering corner cases of the Malifaux rule. And when I was a kid, IBM used to sponsor Monday Night Football, and their commercials were called You Make the Call. And they'd present a situation that arose in a game and ask the audience for their interpretation. They'd cut away to some other commercials, and then right before returning to the game, there'd be another little IBM segment that showed the result. And, it was a fun little commercial. You got to sort of discuss and debate with the people you were watching. You got to learn something about the rules of football. And it stuck with me all these years. So obviously it was a pretty good ad campaign. Although, since I don't own a ton of IBM stuff, maybe it wasn't so effective at its primary goal of getting you to buy IBM products. But nobody's perfect, right? So, in the old IBM commercials, there was one correct answer. But for this series, we're going to be looking at situations in the rules where there isn't maybe a clear answer. People can differ in their interpretations, and we're not saying people are trying to power game or whatever. Reasonable people can reach different conclusions. So the starting point in our discussions will always be the rules as written. Not to be technically correct or whatever, but just to provide everyone with a frame of reference that's going to be universal. Now, no rulebook of any size could ever cover every situation in a game with Malifaux's complexity. There's so many models, and they each have their own abilities and their own actions, and I think Weird actually does a really good job. The rules they're not that big, maybe 40 or 50 pages of rules. And if you had a rule book that was 1,000 pages long, it still wouldn't cover every situation. So this isn't meant to kind of point at Weird and say, haha, you screwed this up, or, you guys are really bad at game design. To the contrary, I think they've done a very good job, and that the rules cover the vast majority of situations. And things are going to come up. Unexpected interactions are going to happen. And so the point of this series is to kind of look at those interactions, to maybe think about the way they work, and maybe to, if you're listening and you kind of are new to the game, maybe to present some of these concepts of, there are situations in the rules that are a little ambiguous, and you're going to want to decide in your own meta how to play them, and how to play them consistently so that it's fair. All paid citations will be to the digital version of the rulebook, and if we talk about gaining grounds, you will specify whether it's the FAQ or the errata, and as of the time of this recording, the current season is Gaining Grounds Season 1. So today we're going to be talking about terrifying. Specifically, can you be forced to take multiple terrifying tests on the same action because another ability has caused the target of the action to change? For instance, can an ability like Take the Hit, which will change a target, force a model to take more than one terrifying test in a single action? And if the answer is no, which terrifying test does the acting model have to take? And if some kind of option is involved, if someone gets to choose which terrifying test is taken, who gets to make that choice? The acting model or the non-acting models. So to begin, let's define these abilities. Terrifying states after an enemy model targets the terrifying model with an attack action, the enemy model must pass a target number X willpower duel or the action fails, right? And we say X because the terrifying test can vary. It's important to understand that terrifying is not a kind of targeting failure. If you fail a targeting test, what happens is the action fails. You would take the terrifying test after step 3 of the resolving action sequence on page 23 of the rules, and if the terrifying test were failed, you would skip to step 6. Unlike other games, maybe, for instance, Magic the Gathering, targeting failure doesn't really seem to be a concept in Malifaux. Now, the Malifaux rules do specify what happens if an action has no legal target. In that case, the action fails. But Terrifying doesn't say that the target doesn't become a legal target. For instance, if you come from a Magic the Gathering background, it's not like someone casts a lightning bolt at your goblin, lightning bolt goes on the stack, and then you cast a spell to give the goblin hexproof, and then the goblin's no longer a legal target and the action fails. That, I think, is I don't want to say intuitive, but for gamers who come to Malifaux from a game like Magic that sort of has a very defined sequence of how these different interactions would resolve, you might be tempted into thinking that Terrifying is a kind of targeting failure. But actually, if you fail the Terrifying, the action fails, but Terrifying itself only happens because you have actually successfully targeted the model. It happens after step 3, the targeting step, where you select the target for the action. Take the Hit is an ability that says after an enemy model targets a friendly model within 2 inches of the model will take the hit. With an attack action, this model, the model will take the hit, may discard a card to place itself into base contact with the friendly model, that is the original target, and becomes the new target of the attack action, ignoring range, line of sight, and targeting restrictions. Both Terrifying and Take the Hit have the same timing window, which is after an enemy model targets. This means that if both abilities would apply, they are simultaneous, and they're resolved under the simultaneous effects rules on page 34. The fact that they both have the same timing window is going to be an important consideration in resolving this. So let's look at the following situation in order to illustrate the issue. Suppose a guild player has a model, Jonathan Reichert. Jonathan is a henchman from the Frontier keyword. He does not have Ruthless or another ability that would allow him to ignore Terrifying. He is engaging Archie, Resurrectionist Enforcer in the Forgotten keyword, and Archie has Terrifying 12. Now, within 2 inches of Archie is a friendly Ashigaru, which is a Resurrectionist minion in the Retainer keyword, and it has Take the Hit on its card. This Ashigaru also happens to have an upgrade attached, Grave Spirit's Touch, and since the Ashigaru is a minion, Grave Spirit's Touch will give the Ashigaru Terrifying 11. So in this case, there's 2 models with Terrifying, Archie with a 12, the Ashigaru with an 11, and the Ashigaru has Take the Hit. If Jonathan attacks Archie, and Archie's controller chooses to have the Ashigaru take the hit, does Jonathan have to take 2 Terrifying tests, or only 1? And if it's only 1, which one? And if someone gets to choose, which player is it that gets to make the selection? So first, we have to address whether or not the Resurrectionist player can wait to see the results of Archie's Terrifying test before declaring Take the Hit. As we covered earlier, they both have the same timing window, so they would both happen simultaneously. Now, in my opinion, you would have to declare Take the Hit before you resolved Terrifying, because they both do have the same timing window. So I don't think that Take the Hit's timing window is actually implicated unless you declare that you're going to do it. Now, the thing is, Malifaux does not have a concept of the stack, again, to go back to Magic the Gathering. So this idea that you would declare it and then not resolve it, it's not explicitly laid out in the Malifaux rules, but since when you declare it, it would have the same timing as another ability that is pending, right? Terrifying does not appear to be optional. If you would rather your opponent didn't make the Terrifying test, that does not appear to be a legal choice under the rules. So I would think that in order to cause this situation, you would have to declare Take the Hit before Archie's Terrifying test. You would not get to wait and see, maybe Jonathan will fail the first Terrifying test and I won't have to worry about it. What's a little less clear to me is when you would have to discard the card for Take the Hit. Because it's not a cost to declare it, you discard the card during the process of resolving Take the Hit. It may even be possible under the rules to declare Take the Hit and then not discard the card, so not change the target. I don't know if there would ever be a reason to do that. Maybe some model triggers off of an ability being declared but not used. I don't actually know if that is a situation that could arise under the rules. But for our purposes, I think it's enough to say you must declare Take the Hit before seeing the Terrifying test. So, Take the Hit and Terrifying, they're both simultaneous. So they're resolved under the simultaneous effect rules. Simultaneous effect rules say that the way you would resolve abilities that are supposed to happen at the same time is the active player would choose one of their models and resolve any effects that are pending on them, and then go to another model that they control, and so on and so forth, until they have no more models with pending simultaneous effects. And then the non-active player would do the same thing. Now, it's actually, I think, ambiguous under the rules as to whether a terrifying test is pending for the active model or, whether it's something on the reactive model. The rules, again, I don't think explicitly spell this out anywhere. My opinion would be that when Jonathan declares the attack, the terrifying test would be pending on Jonathan, under the theory that it's something he has to do. I can understand maybe some other people might want to say, well, it's Archie's ability and it's actually something that's on him. It's something that Jonathan then resolves. Again, reasonable people, I think, can differ. The rules don't seem to spell it out so far as I can tell. If I missed it, please let me know. But I would say that that's an effect that's pending on Jonathan. And here's, the first problem in, well, spoiler alert, trying to get to a situation where you don't have to take multiple terrifying tests in an action. And it's because, although terrifying and take the hit are simultaneous, the rules for resolving the simultaneous effects would have Jonathan resolve Archie's terrifying, and then you would resolve take the hit. Because, there's no situation under which take the hit is pending on one of the acting models. It's not pending on Jonathan. It's either pending on Archie or on the Ashigaru. Using the same analogy whereby if terrifying is on Archie instead of Jonathan. So the simultaneous effect rules require us to resolve terrifying before take the hit. Now, Jonathan has passed terrifying. We then go next to resolve take the hit, and the Ashigaru becomes the new target of the action. The Ashigaru has terrifying 11. Jonathan's facing another terrifying test. Does he have to take it? Well, first, nothing in the rules explicitly says you don't have to take terrifying again, as far as I can tell. This isn't a situation, for instance, where you're in multiple auras. In fact, multiple abilities can stack. Penetrating Stench, for instance, Swamp Fiend players use that quite effectively to try to drain hands. So you can have to resolve multiple versions of the same ability triggering off the same event. Now, there is a question of timing, right? Because we did earlier say that Take the Hit and Terrifying have the same timing window. So maybe you're thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute, that timing window has already passed. Well, yeah, I actually, rules as written, I don't think so. So Terrifying's timing window is after an enemy model targets. Take the Hit says that it changes the target from the original model to the new model, the model with the Take the Hit ability. So the window for after the Take the Hit model is targeted is after resolving Take the Hit. So in this instance, Take the Hit and Terrifying are sequential effects, and they'd be resolved under the sequential effect rules, which are on the same page as the simultaneous effect rules, but basically they are resolved one after the other. You resolve Take the Hit, and then because Take the Hit would spawn Terrifying, rules as written, you would resolve Terrifying. This means, as far as I can tell, a pure rules as written analysis seems to indicate that Jonathan would have to take 2 Terrifying tests in this case. To me, that seems, somewhat unfair and maybe not really intended by the rules. Terrifying is already very strong in Malifaux, and while instances of these 2 Terrifying tests may be rare, or they might require, a somewhat convoluted or complicated setup to achieve, I think the prospect is scary enough to where it's worth looking at and seeing if that's really how we would want to resolve these 2 abilities in these kinds of situations. If we took as kind of a general principle that there should only ever be 1 Terrifying test on an action, what in the rules is actually constraining this? I don't think you can actually point to a section in the rules and say, on page X, there's paragraph Y, and that covers this situation. Perhaps I missed it. That's always an entirely possible outcome, but from what I can tell, there isn't language that would sort of shut this down. If you find some, let me know. But if there isn't explicitly text of the rules that says, this situation wouldn't result in 2 terrifying tests, then we kind of have to find another justification, right? And, the idea that it's unbalanced, it's broken, it's unfair, or it's not intended under the rules, those are going to be arguments that are going to find differing degrees of acceptance with different people, right? Some people, you might use a derogatory term, rules lawyer or whatever, but there are people who kind of prefer to play under the strict letter of the rule. And it's not that they are unfriendly or, incredibly technical, but they believe in a level playing field that's not going to deviate from person to person. Players and groups with that outlook are, going to have a very dim view of saying you can't do something because it's broken, right? If something's broken, that's not their fault. That's a fault of development, or, maybe it's even intentional, whatever. It's not a reason to not do something. To say that something is broken so it shouldn't be allowed, that's not exactly the same as saying, well, it runs contrary to the spirit of the rules. The spirit of the rules is an interpretive argument. It says, I've read the rules, and this is what I came away with it in terms of what I think they were going for. So, I do think, although that is another argument that maybe doesn't have the greatest amount of textual support, it is different than saying we shouldn't do something because it is broken. Again, I think people who are very much grounded in the actual text of the rules are not going to receive that argument particularly well, but it is another justification for why there should only be one targeting test. And I think, the last justification for why there should be one targeting test, in my opinion, is flawed, but it would be one that says, this kind of after the model targets timing only applies to the first instance, and take the hit doesn't really cause another window for after an enemy model targets. If this were your position, I don't know, maybe you might get super grammatical and say targets, refers to the verb, the action of the acting model actually targeting, and take the hit isn't an action of the acting model or an ability of the acting model. It's the acting model is being forced to do this thing. I don't really think you should be resolving things in that way, but if it works for you, that's fine. But however you want to get there, if you believe there should only be one terrifying test from the action, we then have to ask ourselves which terrifying test applies. And is the terrifying test that applies, is it always this way because of the rules, or is there a choice involved? And if there's a choice involved, who gets to make that choice? I think to a certain extent this is going to depend on your justification for why you think there should be one terrifying test. The more technical your position, the more likely that the implication is going to lead to a particular result, right? So, for instance, if you believe that take the hit doesn't spawn another window for terrifying, then obviously only the first terrifying test would ever apply. If your position is, more grounded on balance or fairness, or just, the way you want to resolve it, then I think you have more leeway in determining which terrifying test should apply. In my opinion, the way maybe to do it would be to say that the non-active player, the defending player, the models with terrifying, could choose, and that way, they would be able to benefit from the best terrifying test. So when I set out to do this recording, I didn't really mean to express much of an opinion. I really just wanted to lay out the situation. Now, I think even if you try to be neutral, the way you sort of lay out a situation is often going to give away something about the way you think. And it's probably pretty clear that I have my opinion of what I think the rules as written say. I have my opinion of how I think maybe it should be resolved. Those two opinions are not necessarily the same. And, there are times when I hold an opinion that is maybe contrary to what I think the rules as written say. But, the reason I hold this differing opinion is because I think it's generally maybe not what was intended, not the spirit of the rules. But in any event, I'm not really interested in my opinion. I know my opinion. I am interested in your opinion. So what do you think happens? Are there 2 terrifying tests? Maybe it's not a problem at all. Maybe it's rare enough and it's hard enough to do that, maybe this is just going to be one of those things that, sure, it's strong, but it doesn't break the game, and there's no reason to worry about it. Maybe you think there should only be 1 terrifying test, and maybe you think, the rules as written actually spell out a sequence that only results in 1. I'd love to hear your reasoning. Maybe you think, just on grounds of intent or general fairness, there should only be 1. And if you think there should only be 1, which one do you think applies? How do you think that process is worked out? Let us know. You can drop a comment, send us an email. We would love to hear from you. Malifaux has a lot of small metas out there, and it does have a wider community, and our local Southern California meta would like to be a part of the wider Malifaux discussion, so we would love to hear how your local group would resolve this situation. And if you enjoyed listening to this episode, please consider giving us a like or, a follow, a share, a subscribe. All of those things are super helpful to us, and, it's just great to get any kind of feedback from anyone who may be listening. If you'd like to support the channel via PayPal or Patreon, we have links in the show notes, and that would be greatly appreciated as well. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this first episode of You Make the Call. We will have other episodes that cover other cases in the rules, and we may also have some other limited series, either done by me or one of our other hosts, Colgan or Jim, or maybe one of the players in our meta, kind of exploring issues in the game that are of particular interest on an individual level. Alright, so thank you again, and catch you next time.